catch you up, we've just been going through various passages of Scripture to remind us that our God that we pray to, that we just sung to for 40 minutes, that, I'm going to preach about, that we're just so inundated with the idea of God in the Bible Belt that sometimes we forget that he's three-dimensional and he's not just a theological database in the Bible, that he's real, he's interactive, he's interpersonal. And so I felt led of the Lord to do a series about people that encountered God in the Bible, and I'm not even being vague with my purpose. My purpose is that I want you and I to grow in our hunger to encounter God. And the reason why I say that is because we are, I don't care how old you are in the room, your generation, my generation, younger or older, we've grown up in kind of a system that academizes the faith. What I mean by that is the goal for most Christians is to learn more. Just learn and learn and learn and learn and learn and new stuff and more stuff and deeper stuff. And there is a loss in the idea that I believe originates in the heart of God, that God's not really just, if all he wanted you to do was learn about him, he would have mailed us a book a long time ago and then vanished. He would just said, here, read that. That's not what he does. And the Holy Spirit would be unnecessary to a great extent if all God wanted us to do was learn facts about him. Because you'd just take your mind, you'd read the facts over and over again, you'd memorize the facts, you'd systematize the facts, and you would say, okay, I know the facts about God. But you wouldn't have a relationship with him. And so one of the things that I think that we need to grow in our hunger for is personal encounter with God. About a month ago, after running hard, getting my feet under me here at the church, for 4 months, about a month ago, I just started saying, Lord, I need encounter. I need some shaking. I need to run into you. I'm burning the wick at both ends, and I was realizing that I was missing that interpersonal connection. What's sad is a lot of people aren't missing that because they've never had that. That's not an indictment. It's just to let you know, if that describes you, that's not the full will of God for your life. You can be born again. You can be saved, you can be committed, you can be holy, you can be disciplined, and still not have an interconnectivity with the Almighty. It's highly possible. It happens all the time. And I think as we approach the end of the age, one of the desires of the Lord is that we wouldn't know about him, just know about him, that we would actually know him. This is an all-adult crowd, so I'll just go ahead and say this. When you look in the scriptures, and the word, when it speaks about knowing God, it's often using, either in the Hebrew in the Old Testament or the New Testament in the Greek, it uses a word of knowing that is also the word for a husband's and wife's intimate relationship. It's that kind of deep knowledge. And it's one thing to know the name of your spouse, it's another thing to know your spouse. And the Lord doesn't want us just know him, he wants us to know him in the deepest possible ways. So Isaiah is probably one of the most famous writing prophets of all of Israel. And his life changed after he had an encounter with God. It was a supernatural encounter that took place in the temple. And he was a godly man, a serious man, a committed Jew, a prophet. And then he has this encounter with God, and he sees two things. He sees the Lord high and lifted up. We're going to talk about that in a second. And when he sees the Lord high and lifted up, he also sees himself. And I think if I could say, I want one of these messages to reach you more than any other, I think it's this one, because I think if we will see the Lord as he wants to be seen, we will then immediately begin to see ourselves as he wants us to see ourselves. And when you start seeing God for who he is and start seeing you for who you are, there's this beginning of that beautiful exchange, where you're able to see even the parts of you that aren't pretty, that aren't awesome. But when you see him and then you're looking at him and you're able to see you, it's not guilt and it's not shame and it's not self-loathing and it's not hatred. It's a desire to say, Lord, help me with these parts that don't glorify you. And that's what Isaiah begins to do here. So let me read the text, and then I want to share with you this message that I'm calling Encounters That Leave Us Convinced. And so in Isaiah 6:1, it says this: in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Now, don't run past that. Isaiah said, I saw the Lord. He was sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe, or the fringe of his robe, his majestic robe, filled the temple. And above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now watch this. The foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I'm lost. I like the King James better on that. For I am undone. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me. By the way, seraphim is just a fancy word for angels. Just think a heavenly creature. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. And then verse 8, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. So back in the day, I would have immediately launched into a highly charged missionary sermon right there, because that's the go-to passage of Scripture when you want to place a focus on going to the nations or going out to fulfill your calling and spreading the gospel. I have no problem with that, but that's not what I'm doing tonight. And listen, if God calls you to the mission field tonight, hallelujah, answer the call, but it'll be in spite of my emphasis and not because of it. What I'm actually focusing on is what leads up to verse number 8, and it is a supernatural encounter with God to a man who's made out of the exact same DNA that you're made out of. He's human. He's not superhuman. He is Isaiah of the Bible, but let me tell you, he's a sinner by birth. He's a sinner by choice. He's one who needed his sins atoned for. He dealt with the flesh just like you deal with the flesh. He probably, and we're going to find out, he even admits some of his struggles right here in this passage of Scripture. And so what I don't want you to do is think, yeah, of course Isaiah had an encounter with God because he's Isaiah. Isaiah had an encounter with God because God ordained that encounter was necessary in order for Isaiah to fulfill God's plan for his life. And I believe this. I believe that to the degree that we elevate our hungers and the degree that we expand our understanding of the kingdom and the degree that we sense the urgency of the hour that we live in, our hunger is going to be elevated, and God always matches hunger with encounter. Now, it may not look exactly like Isaiah's, because Isaiah's didn't look like Elijah's, and Elijah's didn't look like Peter's, and Peter's didn't look like Paul, and Paul didn't look like Jacob's encounter. We don't dictate to God how we encounter him, but we do have to say, Lord, if you are able to be encountered, then encounter me. And we elevate our hunger to that place. And so as Isaiah encounters God in the temple, and I'm going to get very specific with you in this, it's not just God he encounters in the temple. Let me just go ahead and give you a sneak peek behind the curtain. It's Jesus that Isaiah sees high and lifted up. It's not actually God the Father. It's God the Son, a pre-incarnate, before he's born, a pre-incarnate encounter with the second person of the Godhead, who we call Jesus Christ. You say, Jeff, how can you say such a thing? I'm glad you asked, and I will tell you in just a few moments how the Bible actually tells you that it's Jesus that he sees. But this encounter leaves Isaiah forever convinced about some things in his life, and I'm going to give you the 3 things. I want you to get 3 things that this encounter convinces Isaiah of, and these are 3 things that your own walk with God needs to leave you more and more convinced about. And the first one I think is crucial, that Isaiah was convinced that God is glorious. Now, we use the word glory and glorious all the time in our churches, and I'm just, every now and then, again, I want to hit a reset button, just make sure we know what we're talking about. When we're talking about the glory of God, and I'll get the verses here in a moment, but when we're talking about the glory of God, we're talking about the weight and the majesty and the effulgence of who God is. We're talking about the distinctive otherness of God. We're talking about what he emanates off of his divine being. And it is immeasurable, and it is potent, and it is inexhaustible, and it is the essence of who God is, and he's the only one that has this type of glory. It is uniquely his. And when Isaiah is encountering God, he's feeling what we call the kavod. The kavod. It is the Hebrew word for the weight of God, and it's almost always translated the glory of God. And so when you're talking about being in the presence of God, some of you have been in Pentecostal charismatic circles your whole life. Others of you are new to the charismatic Pentecostal kind of expression of Christianity. And some of you that are new to it, you see people sometimes that'll fall down. You know, why is the person on the floor? We're singing songs. Why is that person on the floor? And why have they been on the floor for 25 minutes? When are they? And I remember seeing that for the first time, and I didn't understand it. As a matter of fact, I was kind of provoked by it. I was like, that's unnecessary. I'm a dignified Baptist guy. I'm not going to do that. I don't ever want to do that. And buddy, let me tell you something. When the glory of the Lord hits, it's not up for vote sometimes. Sometimes the weight of the presence of the Lord can buckle your knees. It can bring you down. And sometimes it can hold you down. Now, I'm not out to ever judge anybody's Christianity by how frequently or how long they stay on the floor. It's not a badge of spirituality. What I'm saying is it's consistent with Scripture, because when you look in Scripture, especially you get into like 2 Chronicles 6 and 7, where the glory of the Lord fills the place and the people cannot stand. Why? Because the power of God and the glory of God weighs them down. The supernatural overwhelms the natural. And Isaiah was experiencing some of that. So look at how it played out in verses 1 through 4 as we see him get convinced of something he had not been convinced of. In verse number 1, we have this description of what I call God's peerless majesty. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah says, I saw the Lord sitting upon the throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. All right, teaching moment here. So Uzziah had been the king, and he had led Israel back into a very prosperous time. Things were going swimmingly in Israel under Uzziah's reign. Militarily, they were killing it. And economically, they were killing it. And agriculturally, they were killing it. It was a time where they were dominating on every sector of society. And Uzziah had started to become the king at age 16. By the way, that's why we want our teenagers to be pursuing the Lord. We want them to, at the very young age, to be able to connect with the Lord. And at age 16, he's exalted to the throne of Israel, and he led beautifully for about 40 years. And then in a lapse of judgment, when everything's going great, he decides that he not only wants to play the role of a king, but he wants to enter into the office of the priest. And he puts his hand to things that were reserved only for the priest. And then when they tried to stop him, he became enraged. And God protected the activity of the priesthood, and he struck Uzziah with leprosy. And so the last 10 years of his life, Uzziah is living separated from Israel, dies in isolation. And in the year that he died, the country is mourning. But it's in that same state of mourning. When a human ruler falls to the ground, it is as if God says, Isaiah, you're the prophet, you're the spokesman. I want you to know, when the man of God dies, nothing of God himself dies. And so Isaiah, come into the temple, I'm going to show you my glory. And so he goes in, and it is a supernatural vision. Don't try to understand it, okay? You're going to have to a certain extent, put your demand for understanding and explanation in the natural realm and our insatiable appetite for things to make sense. Listen, some of Christianity, here's a big theological statement. Some of Christianity is weird. It's just weird. And so when Isaiah goes into the temple, he has this vision of God sitting upon heaven's throne. It's like the sky opens or the atmosphere opens, and Isaiah's eyes are beholding the reality. Behind the earthly temple, there is a heavenly temple. There is a heavenly throne room, and Isaiah is looking directly into it, and he sees the Lord sitting high and exalted on his throne, and his train, which speaks of his majesty, his garment, his robe, his royal robe, is so large that it begins to fill the entire temple. So this is the vision that Isaiah has. I hope that we'll leave room in our theological grid that God still reserves the right to impart vision. He still reserves the right to bust up the natural understanding of things. He still reserves the right to come into the middle of your mundane, ordinary, by the book, according to the schedule, have to after have to after have to. And God reserves the right to call a timeout anytime he wants and invade your life with supernatural presence and vision. And I believe if you're hungry for it, you should expect it to occur. But look at what he sees. He not only sees something, he begins to hear something. And it's coming through the voice of the angelic ministers in heaven. It says, above him stood the seraphim, and each had 6 wings, and with 2 he covered his face, and with 2 of the other wings he covered his feet, with 2 of the other wings he's flying. And one seraph calls to the other seraph, and they're calling to one another in this antiphonal singing, and they're calling out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is full of his glory. So when Isaiah is having this encounter that is convincing him of God's glorious presence, the angels take on the activity of being messengers. And they began to cry out right in Isaiah's presence. They're declaring it over the Son of God sitting on the throne. And they're saying, he's holy, he's holy, he's holy. And he is the Lord of hosts. And the whole earth is full of his glory. Why is that important? Because Uzziah had been leading Israel, and everybody talked about the glory of Isaiah's reign in the year, Uzziah. In the year of Uzziah's death, everybody's mourning the loss of Uzziah's glory, and the Lord comes in and as if to say, I don't share my glory with anybody else. Uzziah is dead. He's with me now. I want you to know my glory will fill the whole earth. It's important that maybe we think about that right now while there are glory wars going on in our generation, and whether it's, our teenagers on social media, or whether it is the glory fights that go on in Washington, D.C., or whether it's the glory of the entertainment industry or the sporting industry or the beauty industry. We are glory hogs. Human nature is that we want the glory. And in the end, God wants to make sure one thing is settled forever and ever, that he gets all the glory. Somebody asked me recently, well, how can he be a good God if he wants all the glory for himself? Isn't that selfish? And I'm like, no, because he's the only one worthy of all the glory. He's the only one who deserves all the glory. He's the only one that can receive all the glory and it be perfectly pure and holy. And so they're crying out, holy, holy, holy. Now it's that holy message that I think is penetrating Isaiah's heart. Because Isaiah is about to have the heavy part of this encounter hit him full frontal here in a moment. While he's standing there in this vision, everything he's seeing and everything he's hearing, he's being confronted with the supremacy of God, that God is greater than an earthly king. That God's glory is heavier than the glory of even the most resplendent king in Israel. And it's as if God is sending a message to Isaiah saying, you need to aim your focus up a little bit higher, because the things of earth have nothing to do with my glory. I'm above it all. It's a good word for us to remember right now in a chaotic season, that if you let yourself, you will be consumed with the horizontal. If I can risk getting in your business, some of y'all just need to quit watching the news, because you're getting inundated and soaked and just covered with the toxic, septic news and all that's going on. And you're glancing at God, but you're fixating on the headlines. And I'm just going to encourage you to flip that thing. Fixate on God and glance at the headlines. And I promise you, your spirit will experience a sweetening to it. Then verse number 4. So again, we're still in the vision. And so he's seeing the Lord on his throne. He's hearing the angels and seeing them with their wings and flying around, these heavenly creatures, and they're crying out, holy, holy, holy. And it says in verse 4 that the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And so in the midst of all this is like sensory overload. Guys, listen to me. This is not an academic thought. This is not Isaiah reading a book. This is Isaiah, the prophet of Israel, and he's having a sensory experience of the presence of God. I'm just going to ask you this. By no means is this meant to do anything other than to provoke your thinking and stir your hunger. But have you gone so long and you don't feel him? Is there no sense within some of our Christian experiences where we know that God has walked in the room, if I can say it that way? And I know the argument is, well, Jeff, he's omnipresent, he's everywhere, so saying he walked in the room is really unbiblical. Well, bravo for that argument. But I'm asking you about your relationship. I'm asking you about your experience. Has there ever been in your life, or is there currently, or has it been too long since you recognize the Lord is moving? The Lord is present. The Lord is in the midst, and he's not observing, he's orchestrating. That's what we need to be returned to the church in America. We need not just more theology and more songs and more ideas and more debates. We need the presence of God moving in the midst, shaking the threshold foundations, shaking things up. Oh man, I got like 4 of you that are into this tonight. That's okay. I'm just gonna roll. I get it. It's midweek service and it's a little heavy, but I'm just telling you, man, that this is what we need. This is so what we need. This is what every church, including the one you're sitting in right now, needs. You show me the most hyper-charismatic, presence, manifesty kind of kaboom church in America, I'll say they need more of the presence of God. So the foundations of the threshold shook. When the Lord moves into a place, I'm going to tell you, he will shake up and then break up the foundations if they aren't consistent with his glory. Why? Because he's supreme. And sometimes our foundations, they get settled. And they contain things that can't hold up what God wants to build. And so instead of God building on a foundation that can't support what he wants to do, he breaks up the foundation. He shakes up the foundation. Let me just tell you this about young millennials and Gen Zers. Just get ready for this, because they're going to continue to pursue the Lord. We got some in the room tonight. They're going to continue to pursue the Lord at such a level of hunger that by the time that they come into their spiritual prime and their calling, their work will be massive reformation. They will turn things on its head, and it won't be because they're rebellious. It'll be because they're hearing the Lord, and the Lord saying, those foundations that your parents and your grandparents walked on, they've been walked on long enough. I bless those foundations. I use those foundations, but they will not hold what I'm about to build. And so I'm praying and trying to pour in my best into younger people and just recognize that, hey, look, that's what God wants to do. It's up to us to impart to them the wisdom that they need. It's up to us also to facilitate the zeal that they have. And so he's shaking up the foundations, and the house fills with smoke. So often in your Old Testament, when we see this activity of places filling with smoke, it's just, again, a manifest presence of the Lord. So I'm not saying that that's the norm, but I'm just saying that sometimes when the manifestation of God enters a place, he reserves the right to appear audibly. He reserves the right to manifest visibly. He reserves the right to take the foundations of what we think we know about God and flip that thing on its head. And then we are left with the idea to figure out, is that the Lord? What in the world just happened? And guys, I'm going to tell you, that's a far better adventure than just showing up to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and, being force-fed another Bible study. I'm just going to preach to you too, because I know you're feeling this right now. So, all right, let's get to the second point. I haven't gotten to the second point yet. Help me, Jesus. He's convinced that God is glorious. And look at what happens when he becomes convinced that God is holy. This one's not as easy to receive, because this one is not so much about God as it is about you. It's about me. When he hears the seraphim singing or crying out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. His glory, his presence, his glory will fill the entire earth. Something happens with Isaiah, because as he's seeing God, he's now able to see who he has been. And Isaiah is about to go deep into conviction right here. So he says in verse number 5 at the beginning, he's just seen this and he's just heard this. He says, woe is me. I'm undone. I'm lost. And look at what he gets convicted about. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. So this encounter with God, highly supernatural, highly revelatory, but it was also highly convicting because Isaiah suddenly understood that he was no different than everybody around him. Let me give you a little homework if you're interested in it. Read the first 5 chapters of Isaiah. And if you don't want to read it, let me sum it up for you. Isaiah is looking at everybody else and saying, you're a sinner. Woe to you. And you over there, you're a sinner. Woe unto you. You're going to get judged. God's going to judge you. Oh, don't think you're going to run away. You're all sinners too. You're all sinners. That's the first 5 chapters of Isaiah. Sounds like a fundamentalist, doesn't he? Then he sees God. He's not thinking about anybody else. He's saying, it's me. Woe is me. I'm lost. I'm undone. The general tenor of what he's saying is, I am in trouble with this holy God whose glory I've never seen until this moment. Let me give you something that I think is easier the older you are to receive. When you begin to see God and when you begin to encounter God and when you begin to the degrees that we can, understand more about God, well, let me just say it this way. The more I see Jesus, the less eager I find myself to pronounce judgment on others. Doesn't mean we don't deal with sin. We do deal with sin. We deal with it biblically. We deal with it with the heart of God. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the person that's convinced that their goal and their calling in life is to go around pointing out everybody else's sin nonstop. Those people like to say, well, I have a discerning spirit. And I typically like to say, no, actually, you're just a hypercritic. You've just given yourself permission to walk around telling everybody what's wrong with them. And the reason why you're able to do that so freely and glibly is because you haven't seen the Lord yet. Because when you see the Lord, you will mourn heaviest over your own sin, even if it's forgiven. Listen, I understand our sin's under the blood, but the reality is that when we see him and we see his holiness and we recognize how sinful we are apart from him, we are aware of this constant infusion of grace that comes to us. And so it robs us of our eagerness to go around and tell everybody else what's wrong with them. Now listen, you know, you've hung out here long enough. I'm not a softy on sin. I'm not advocating that we turn a blind eye to things. We don't help people if we don't talk about sin. I'm talking about the attitude where the self-appointed defenders of the faith walk around and want to expose everybody else, and they never look in the mirror. And so he gets this self-awareness and understands suddenly that he's no different from everybody he's been denouncing for 5 chapters. And so why did this occur? Well, he tells us. He says, I'm lost, I'm undone, I'm a man of unclean lips. Can I just risk this here? I literally believe it's possible that Isaiah was so convicted over his speech, what came out of his mouth. It's so like basic, but guys, I just want to tell you, man, I mean, the same lips that praise the Lord ought not be releasing F-bombs. I don't know, just a thought. Just a thought. He says, I'm a man of unclean lips. And then he's looking around and goes, and everybody around me talks the way I do. Now, it could very well be that he's just using a poetic expression to say what Jesus defined a little bit about 750 years later. Jesus said, what comes out of the mouth is sourced in the heart. So maybe Isaiah is just saying, oh, my wicked heart produces wicked words, and I've been denouncing people. Maybe that's what he's saying. Or maybe he's just saying, oh man, I see God and he heard what I said this afternoon. Help me, Lord. He says in verse number 5, my eyes have seen the King. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Now this is why I think this is important, guys. Because Isaiah was not the first prophet. He had a long succession of prophets before him. And he wasn't willing at this point to live off the testimony of any of those other prophets. By the way, he wasn't the first prophet that had a visual manifestation of the Lord. There were other prophets. Some of even the writing prophets had seen the Lord. But now Isaiah is in this just singular moment where he's like, I can't get past this encounter. I see the Lord. I see with my own eyes. This is nobody else's testimony. This is me and him. This will change me forever. And guys, this is what we need. Do y'all know do you know what drafting is? Like bicycle, any cyclist in the room? Got any cyclists? Maybe a few, maybe not. But drafting is when you ride on your bike behind the person in front of you in a race because they're cutting through the wind resistance and you are coming behind them and you have the capacity with less energy to keep pace with them. And a lot of people do that in the Christian church. A lot of people draft on somebody else's testimony, draft on somebody else's experience, draft on somebody else's theology. And we've become a generation, if we're not careful, of drafters. And God says, no, I actually don't want you mimicking the person that went before you. I want you to get in your own lane, and I want you to press into me, and I want you to see me, and I want you to experience me, because I love you, and what I'm doing for others, I will happily do for you. But it's easier to draft, but it's not better. He says, my eyes have seen the King. This is a season, let me just prophesy for a second. This is a season for all of us to start being bold in love before the God, the Father, and just say to him, Lord, I want my own experience with you. I mean, do you ever get this place of holy frustration that I'm tired of hearing about healings in the third world? Why aren't they happening here? Why is it always somebody else's, Instagram video where somebody's getting healed or somebody's getting delivered or somebody's getting saved? Why do we always have to read about it? Why isn't it happening through us? And what the Lord is saying is before he entrusts something through us, he wants to give something to us. And we need a personal vision of him. Now, again, maybe it doesn't look just like Isaiah's. I'm not saying that this is the construct by which we can't meet with God unless it looks just like this. What I'm saying is that he knows how to reveal himself to you. And I think right now that this is a season where the Lord starts making your testimony the one that makes others hunger. Instead of you hearing everybody else's testimony and hungering and where's my bread? Where's the thing that he has for me? When he says, my eyes have seen the King, just very quickly here, I mentioned it earlier. Jesus was actually in John chapter 12 describing this passage. Jesus was doing a little exegesis, a little preaching. And Jesus in John 12:41, he's prophesying, he's interpreting Isaiah, and he says in John 12:41, when Isaiah was writing this, he was writing it about me. Isaiah's eyes saw me, the Son of Man, upon the throne. And so I really want us to just, it's probably not a big deal. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I want to be able to say this and for you to be able to see it. When Isaiah had the vision in the temple, it wasn't just God, it was Jesus. He saw the King, your King, the one who would later die to provide atonement for Isaiah's sins that he's currently in the process of being deeply convicted over. And he sees Jesus there on the throne. So in verses 6 and 7, remember, we left Isaiah and he's trembling. He's like, I'm a sinner. I'm looking on the King. I've seen the Lord of hosts. And immediately after he confesses his sinfulness, and he's broken and he's contrite, one of the seraphim flew to me, he says, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from off the altar. And he touched my mouth. And remember, that was the place where Isaiah was convicted that his sin was flowing. He touched my mouth and said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. So I like how God moves, because God doesn't do parole. God doesn't do probation. God doesn't make you spin your wheels, hang you out over hell a little while, toying with you before he declares to you you're forgiven. As soon as Isaiah had gotten convicted of his sin, as soon as Isaiah understood that he was the unclean one, woe upon me, not just woe upon all those people in the first 5 chapters, woe upon me, God didn't play with his child there. God says to him, says to the seraphim, go, mediate my forgiveness. And the angel takes a coal off the altar, and in this vision flies and lays that coal on Isaiah's lips. He meets him at the point of his conviction. He goes straight to the place where Isaiah knew he was struggling the most with his wickedness. And I love it because, again, God doesn't just shout from a distance, you're forgiven. God makes it interconnecting. Now, yes, he used an angel to do it, but there was still an undeniable moment where the Lord met Isaiah in the wake of his conviction and his brokenness and his sin. And he didn't chastise him for the messages of the first 5 chapters. He doesn't even say anything about the sin other than to say, your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for. Maybe some of us in the room just need to go there for a minute. Because it's real easy when we think of the holiness of God and the glory of God and the majesty of God and the greatness of God, and we're talking about Isaiah seeing in his own sin. If you don't go to verse 6 and 7, you'll just be stuck in the world of, I'm unclean, I'm unclean, I'm unclean, I'm unclean. That's not where God leaves Isaiah. The I'm unclean moment is part of the doorway that leads to the corridor of grace where he experiences the salvation of God. And the testimony of heaven, and this is Old Testament, so, I mean, listen, some people pit the old against the new. Listen, it's the same God, and it's always the blood of the sacrificial lamb that atones for sins. And I love what the Lord does here. He says, your guilt is gone. Some of you need to walk out of this place tonight and start speaking over your fragile conscience. Jesus has taken my guilt away. Jesus has eradicated my history. It's literally non-existent in heaven. And some of you don't believe grace is that strong. Go ahead and believe it. Because listen, it's either gone or it's all on you. And Jesus says it's gone. I ought to give you 30 seconds just to think about the most sinful chapters in your life and just simmer in those juices for a minute, just so we can appreciate the fact that it's all gone. It's all gone. If my life, pre-conversion and even some moments post-conversion, if my worst implosive moments were put up on the screen, you'd never let me preach to you. You would never listen to a word I said. Why? Because apart from Jesus Christ, I can do some heinous things and have done some heinous things. But guess what? Heaven's big screen, when they play my sin record, is just a picture of Jesus. It's just him. And so you've got to embrace that, because if you're living in the parole and not the pardon, if you're living in this purgatory of probation with God, listen, y'all know my story. Probation may or may not have been part of my history, but theoretically if it was, you got to show up and prove you're doing everything right, and if you're not, your original sentence is on you again. God doesn't operate like that. Some versions of Christianity make you think that God is just saying, yeah, well, I let you off back on that day where you asked Jesus in your heart. I let you off, but I tell you what, you mess up again and you're going to be in trouble for that, and everything else, we're bringing it back. And you live under condemnation, and you live under fear, and you live under the pressure of perfectionism, and you don't hear the seraphim saying your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for. You hear the devil, you hear the hiss of the serpent saying you're not enough. You're not enough. You're still not enough. You're never going to be enough. And listen, you've got to take this. This is not in my notes. This is in the moment. I think this is a word for some of you. You've got to take ownership over the voice that you listen to. And you've got to say, sometimes you just have to out-talk the devil. Because if he's chattering in your ear, you don't have to listen to it. And I'm going to tell you, you start preaching the gospel into the demonic realm, you just start talking about the blood of Jesus. Y'all are going to think I'm crazy, but I do this. You just start preaching and proclaiming and declaring the blood of Jesus. The voice will stop, because they hate when anybody brings glory to God, and especially through the tenets of the gospel. Why would the devil hang around and listen to you talk about his defeat? He leaves. Isaiah, your guilt's taken away. And the reason why your guilt is gone is because your sin is all atoned for. I just dare you to start believing that God sees you as clean. I just dare you. Because if you'll believe that you're clean, guess what you'll start living like? You're clean. If you believe that your basic nature is that of a corrupt sinner, your behavior will follow your beliefs. But if you'll change your belief system and say, no, I'm actually not a corrupt sinner. I am a saint. I am blood-washed. I am spirit-filled. I am following Jesus. On the occasions I stumble, the Lord just comes to me and he will say over me, Jeff, your guilt is gone. That sin is atoned for. And if you listen closely, you hear him say, now go and sin no more. He's not a softy on it. So finally, verse 8, and we'll be done. So convinced that God is holy and convinced that God is glorious, and lest this become some exercise in just, 45 minutes of theology, let's get practical and see Isaiah becomes convinced that God is moving. God's moving. I think some of us have a concept in the church of like God is a really tired grandpa, like in a wicker rocker in heaven, just waiting for the calendar to pass, just passive, distracted, bored. No, God hasn't diminished in his strength. He's not abated in his determination to bring all things unto the perfect climax that permanently eradicates evil, destroys Satan, and presents his son Jesus before every eye as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And so he's active, he's missional, and he's moving. And because of that, I just want to say to you, no matter where you are in life and no matter what your job or your career or your current season holds for you, I just want you to know if God is moving, he's still inviting you to move in tandem with him. He's actually saying, I want you to move with me. So verse number 8, in the beginning of it, so he's seen the Lord. In verse number 8, he says, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying. Isn't it interesting that God hasn't spoken yet in Isaiah 6? The seraphim have, Isaiah have, but God's just sitting there being glorious. He's giving Isaiah a moment to experience the encounter of his presence. And then God speaks. Before I go into what he says, again, this is another opportunity for you to just address where you are, what's going on in your Christian life. So I do that by questions. And again, the questions are meant to get you to think like they're meant to get me to think. And so here's the question. Do you hear him? It's an important question. The reason why it's important is because of a couple of other verses that I'm just going to give you for support. In Isaiah 30:21, you can write this down. God the Father says in Isaiah 30:21, and your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. When you turn to the right or when you turn to the left. Just pause there for a second. It's a beautiful picture of the commitment of God to you right where you are tonight. Because I'm sure for people of faith, there are moments where we have to make decisions. We have to land on a choice. We have options, and we don't always know in the natural what to do. And though we are people of faith, and though we have the Word of God in so many instances to guide us and tell us exactly what to do, there's a lot of places in life where we just don't know. We have what look like 3 to 5 viable options in front of us, and we don't know which one's the right one. Now, some people overanalyze and some people underanalyze. Some people be like, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. God will fix it if I make the wrong decision, so I'm going to do what I want to do. I think that's too casual. Other people get into that paralysis of analysis, and they can't make a decision because their primary motivation is the fear of making the wrong decision. And here's another alternative. Slow down and believe that God keeps his word. And he says, the Father says in Isaiah 30:21, he says, I'm the one right behind you, and I'm going to show you exactly where to walk. I'm going to lead you. And you eventually make your decision, and you do it on faith. You say, well, Jeff, what if I get it wrong? Well, sometimes you will. Nobody's got a perfect record of faith. Come on. But sometimes, if we are in crucial moments, we have to come to the conclusion that the Father that loves us so much will not allow us to make a decision that's going to ruin everything, and especially if our heart posture is to say, Lord, I just want to do what you want to do. He says, good, because I have your ear, and this is the way, start walking in it. By the way, New Testament. So if the Father says it in Isaiah 30:21, Jesus says it in John 10:27. I love this verse. He says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. So that's what we call, there's a difference. I'll give you a little Bible study here, a little seminary moment. You have what we call prescriptive verses in the Bible and descriptive verses. Prescriptive means you are being prescribed a course of action to take. Descriptive means it's just telling you a fact. This is a descriptive verse. He's not saying, hey, my sheep, you need to hear my voice. He's saying descriptively, my sheep will hear my voice. And so one of the things that you've got to go ahead and start training yourself in is that you hear the voice of the Lord. That you hear the voice of the Lord. Now there's some issues. If you've got sin in your life that's unrepented of, or if you have a rebellious heart, yeah, you're probably not going to hear him. But I'm talking to people who want to hear his voice, who are walking in their very best ability in holiness and commitment unto the Lord. There's nothing in between. And you're going to hear the voice of Jesus as he leads you. And so Isaiah has seen him with his eyes, and now he hears the voice of the Lord saying what? Verse 8, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? This is where Isaiah becomes convinced that God is moving. Remember, he spent 5 chapters telling everybody how sinful they were, and he did nothing to help them. That's not the heart of the Father. That's not what he does. So now, for the first time after he's seen God, he's actually being allowed to peek into the council room of the Trinity. Notice the wording there, who will go for us? It's like an inter-Trinitarian conversation, Father, Son, and Spirit. And the question is, who's going to go for us? Who's going to get on mission with us? Who's going to do on earth, where we've given the dominion of earth to human beings, the elect, the people of God, we've given them the ability to advance the kingdom on earth. Now I'm asking the question, who will go for us? So I think it's beautiful that one of the first things that Isaiah hears is an invitation or an opportunity to get on mission with God. That's an entirely separate message that I'm not going to preach tonight, but I do want to just I want to stick this in your heart and your brain. Some of you have a call of God on your life. Everybody, in one sense, has a call of God on their life. Everybody. We're all called to be reflecting the glory of God intentionally, to collectively be making disciples unto Jesus Christ. Yes, to be evangelizing. We've all got that collective partnership that we have in advancing the kingdom. But very specifically, I would say this. Some of you need to consider that the Lord has a call on your life that involves more than just a general sense of doing the will of the Lord. There is the reality that some of you have or will receive a very specific call, and attached to it is the idea of whether or not you'll say yes. Who will go for us? Whose will is to go for us? Who can I send? I wonder if there are people in the room tonight, people that'll watch on live stream, people that'll watch later in media streams, that right there where you're sitting, God's stirring afresh in your heart, and you don't know how you're going to do it. You don't have the resources to do it. You don't understand the calendar of it. You've got 100 things in the culture that seem to be 2 inches in front of your face, and it's hard for you to see it. But you know in your heart of hearts that God has something more for you than you've been living out. And it's not an issue of condemnation. It's an issue of invitation. And so the Lord's still asking that question. Back when I was getting started in ministry, I saw young men and women getting called all the time. Like, it was normal. It was like once every couple of months, some 20-something would stand up and say, I'm called. I saw 50-year-olds getting called. I remember, I won't mention their name, but there was a couple in their 60s that left lucrative jobs to become missionaries down in the Philippines. Like Fortune 500, like massive, heavy-duty income, and walked away to become missionaries in the Philippines, and they're still down there today. And they're not young. But they answered the call because they heard the inner witness of the Holy Spirit saying, who's going to go for us? Who can we send? So I'll leave that with you tonight because all it reminds us of is the reality that God was moving then and he's moving now. And then we'll end it with Isaiah's commitment. He says, well, here I am, send me. It really was that simple. You see, encounters with God will eventually increase our response to what God is doing in the world in the present season. I'm not interested in Instagram encounters. I'm not interested in cool, manifesty, YouTube-ish encounters that sensationalize for a moment, but they don't result in life change or mission. I'm not interested in it. I'm not impressed by it, and I'm not the judge of all this stuff, but I would risk it by saying, I don't think you should be impressed by it either. How many more videos do we need to see of somebody doing something cool and supernatural? I mean, how many more awesome worship moments need to be clipped and put on media, and us say, that's awesome, and we feel the vibe, and we like the lights, and we like the cutaway shot. And listen, I do TV ministry, so I'm not saying that media is irrelevant. What I'm saying is we ought not let that be the end. Those encounters and those moments and the heavy presence of God are not meant just for us to talk. I mean, listen, without being irreverent, back in the day when you'd get drunk on Friday night and everybody'd wake up Saturday morning and you'd rehearse what all the stupid, crazy, kooky stuff so-and-so did or what you did or what the others did. And it was all like you tried to one-up with your story about who got the most wasted and who did the weirdest thing or who did the most outrageous thing. And I see a cleaned up version of that in the church, that we talk about this and we talk about that and God did this and God did that. And the question is anybody going anymore? Is anybody saying, that's awesome, and from that, let's go to where God's not doing any of that stuff yet because nobody will go, nobody is being sent, or nobody's answering the call. So forgive me if that sounds overly critical, but there's just a little bit of a righteous burning in me right now that the clock is ticking, the calendar is turning, the time is short, and we're YouTubing our Christian lives to impress one another, and meanwhile, people are dying without the gospel of Jesus Christ while we're high-fiving each other because of our awesome worship sets. I didn't mean to end on such a downer, but I'm just like, you just get to that place where, the heart of God, the voice of God is always crying out to a generation. Who will go for us? Who can we send?